One night, my boyfriend and I were walking home from a nightclub close to our apartment. The owner of the club was one of our good friends, whom we will call Pete. Because we were so close with Pete, we often stayed at the club much later than everyone else. On this night, we had left at sometime close to 3 in the morning. At that time, the streets were practically empty. We said goodbye to Pete and his girlfriend, whom we will call Annie. We started our walk home, and moments after we left, we heard gunshots in the distance. We both looked back and saw that Pete and Annie were both lying on the ground while a car sped away in our direction. The car had 2 guys in the front and 1 guy in the back. They knew that we had seen what happened and began firing shots at us. Luckily, there was a dumpster right by us. We ducked down and used the dumpster as our shield. The guy in the back seat jumped out of the car and walked behind the dumpster where my boyfriend and I were ducking for cover. He pulled the trigger, but his gun jammed, and then the other 2 guys yelled for him to get back into the car. He got back in the car but not before kicking the dumpster and telling us we better keep our mouths shut. We were so terrified on the walk home. The 5-minute walk felt like an eternity. When we finally made it home, we looked around before entering our place. We thought maybe we were being watched. We barely got any sleep that night and felt blessed that we hadn't been harmed that morning. Once we had calmed down, we made the decision to go to the precinct and report what had happened. After all, Pete and Annie were our very good friends, and we owed it to them to report what had happened. We gave the police our statements, and they followed up with us a few times after with questions. Ultimately, Pete and Annie's killers were caught, and it turns out that Pete had been involved in some shady activity at the club that ultimately took a wrong turn. We also learned that we weren't the only witnesses that night. There was an elderly woman who lived in an apartment nearby where the shooting happened, and she recognized one of the shooters as her nephew and told the police. One night, I was home alone, watching a movie, when I heard voices outside the door of my home. I walked over to the door to see 2 guys with masks attempting to break into my home. Before I could run back to the couch where my phone was, they had successfully managed to pry my locks open. As I grabbed my phone, one of the guys grabbed my arm and forced the phone out of my hand. I was slammed onto the couch while he had one hand over my mouth to keep me from screaming. I was desperate to get away from his grip, so I bit his hand. That's when he punched me really hard in the arm. After that, I saw a weapon for the first time. He pulled out a knife and began threatening to hurt me if I didn't cooperate. Seeing the knife sobered me immediately, and the reality sank in that I had no control, and I would have to totally submit if I wanted to stay alive. Once I had calmed down, the guy sat me up and began asking me questions about where I kept my valuables, including money and jewelry. I directed him to a safe in my bedroom, and he instructed me to unlock it, which I did. I watched as the other man loaded my jewelry and cash into a backpack. Before they left, they took my cell phone and told me to count to 1,000 before I moved. They said they would be watching me, and if I didn't follow their instructions, they would be back to harm me. When they left, I did exactly what they told me to do. I counted to 1,000 before running outside into my neighbor's house to call for help. My neighbor was so shocked to see me standing on her porch, trembling. She invited me in immediately and called the police. When they came, I told the police everything that happened. I was taken to the police station for further questioning, and I noticed something very peculiar. The police officer who was interviewing me was wearing the chain that the man who held the knife to my throat had been wearing. His voice also sounded exactly the same as the knife-wielding man. I thought at first that maybe I was being paranoid. But then, he had a rebuttal for everything I said, especially when I would give a description of the suspect. I left the police station feeling discouraged and ultimately decided not to continue cooperating with the case out of fear that there would be a cover-up or worse, retaliation. I decided to move on with my life. Living in the same house where the violation happened weighed on me, so I eventually moved out of my home. One night, while I was working at a McDonald's drive-thru, the craziest thing happened. A man placed an order, and when he got to the window, he had a long shotgun that he pointed at me and demanded cash from the register. When I told him that there was no cash, he got angry and began cursing at me and my coworker. My coworker was on the grill, and I was the cashier, so I was closest to the window. I was so scared, I had no clue what to do. There was another customer who had pulled into the parking lot and saw everything happening. He hopped out of his car, withdrew his weapon, and started firing at the man holding the shotgun. Without giving the gory details, let's just say it was a headshot, and it was messy. My coworker called the police after the shooting, and they arrived very quickly. The entire incident left me traumatized, and I wasn't able to return to work after what happened that night. This is Terribly Spooked. If you dare, subscribe now.